This time of year, the weather is absolutely perfect. Hopefully you've had the chance to get out and do some training and push some of your comms gear. But just like any other part of your gear, it's going to be affected by the weather. It's going to be affected by the terrain. And there are some really basic maintenance items that need to be addressed. And we're going to get into it now in this video. So let's do it.
All back units in 4071 at 211 just occurred, New Jersey and Savannah. Suspects are armed with a handgun. They're described.
Just taking a guess, but I'm pretty sure that the majority of people that would watch a channel like this are very familiar with preventative maintenance, whether it's for your vehicle doing PMs, whether it's for your rifle, your pistol, anything like that, cleaning it, oiling it, maintaining it. We are just all up on the fact of we want our gear to perform when we need it. So as you know, or if you didn't know, maybe you've seen from watching some of the other videos, that I spend the later summer months in the mountains of the Western United States. And then in my full-time career, that has me spending a large portion of the other months conducting various types of operations in the woods on the East Coast. So with that, I just wanted to get into some of the obstacles that you may encounter when operating in these environments, as well as some of the preventative maintenance measures you can do to help protect your comms gear. As you have seen, I love getting out and doing testing on various radios, on various bands, mainly UHF and VHF, because the thing I'm concerned about for my personal preparedness use, as well as for Ranch Strategies operations, is self-sufficient comms, mainly simplex, but we do utilize some personal repeaters for certain operations, and we're going to get into a lot of that in some later videos. But for this, the traditional thinking has always been to utilize VHF in rural settings and UHF in urban settings, and that's just due to the length of the wavelength and how they would travel across the terrain. But if you go back and watch some of the range testing videos, UHF has outperformed VHF in virtually every scenario that I've put it through. And yes, this is probably due to the UHF wavelength with those factory antennas having a quarter or almost quarter wavelength antenna height, where the VHF ones are well short of that. But again, for our applications, it's not practical to be running around with a 2-foot tall antenna flopping around. And yes, now, since both of these bands operate on line of sight, whether you're on VHF, UHF, any obstructions that it would encounter and get in the way, to include stuff as simple as trees and shrubs and any sort of vegetation, this is going to weaken the signal to some extent. And this is why I have, without it being my intent, but just through taking the results of my testing and putting it into practice, we've essentially made the argument for using UHF as our primary, band that we're going to go with in the woodland environment.
351! Rover, sit! Hut!
And now for the last, however long it's been, 5 or 6 years or so, I've been getting sent out to some of the country's most remote and mountainous regions. And with those travels, I always bring a personal HT with me. And while I don't get to do any really what I would consider, formal simplex UHF comms testing, I will do some SOTA activations or local repeater work on the UHF bands, all the while constantly using VHF simplex and VHF repeater comms that's assigned to the incident. So I'm not getting to do a head-to-head comparison the way I would normally like to do it. I am getting to see some of the range differences between, and how the VHF versus UHF is working, even in those mountainous environments. So why was all that worth mentioning? Where am I going with this? It comes down to the fact that no matter the environment you're operating in, antenna height and location will always be a factor when trying to range out your comms, which we'll also get into more in a upcoming video. There's a lot planned for this channel. But for now, let's just leave it to the fact that if you would have to extend that range because maybe you are right at the end of its limits, simply just by trying to get a little bit of higher elevation and reattempting that contact might actually be able to make that difference. Speaking of antennas, this is something that if you are out working or training, insert your LARPing comments below, bring on the insults. You know how I feel about this. Say what you want, but you have to get out there and train, and you have to train in your gear. There's no substitute for it. But traversing through uneven terrain in your gear, which is going to be throwing off your center of gravity, you are going to have stumbles and falls. If you want to take this to the next level, try doing it under night vision. You're going to have a lot of stumbles and fall. It's just going to be unavoidable. But while doing all of this, one thing we have to come to the reality of is that we cannot treat our gear like glass. It's going to get beat up just a little. It just is. It's just the nature of the business. So one of the first things I would say is that whenever you have downtime, or at least after each use and you're putting your stuff away, inspect the antennas on your radio, as this will probably be one of the first things to get damaged. I mean, even if you are careful, but you use your gear, daily, the normal expected regular wear and tear alone will eventually add up. So if you notice that your antenna has cracks or tears, or just seems like it's bent at some weird angle, or possibly even broken, just replace it. Especially if you notice you are having range issues. This could just be because of the age of the antenna itself, or again, that wear and tear on it could be causing it to have a diminished physical connection to the radio itself. Now, one thing that's pretty much universally unavoidable, but is especially severe when you're up in the extreme elevations in the mountains, is fluctuations in temperature. And by that I mean, pretty extreme fluctuations in temperature. When you get the chance, you have your downtime, like I said, you're checking out your radio stuff, just doing a quick inspection, looking for any damage, cracks, basically anything that would cause intrusion into the housing, because we could just look for places that dirt, debris, water even could enter it, because that will certainly damage things up. But even some like small, minute parts of the radio, and some of them are kind of introduced by the factory itself, but places that could allow for condensation to enter into the radio. And that's what I mean by those temperature fluctuations, because things like your charging areas, your accessory plugs, the speaker, or even the controls and buttons could allow for that moisture to get in there, create condensation, and really mess up your radio. And another thing, while you're doing these inspections, depending on the case or holster you're using, understand that whatever device they are using to secure that radio is probably putting stress on it in some form or another. For example, with this 09 holster I'm using, which I do absolutely love, it has this elastic band to go over the volume knob to really secure it in place beyond just the friction that it gets from the fit against the kydex. But this is quite snug, and it is absolutely putting lateral stress on this knob. So I keep an eye on it, because I don't want that to eventually, break off the volume knob on the radio. Another issue that I experienced was back when I was with the FDNY. As you know, we use those leather radio straps, and on the bottom of that is like a leather radio holster. And one thing we were having issues was, I think we were using, I believe it was the MTS 2000s at the time. I don't remember 100%, but we started to run into some issues with them where all of a sudden these radios were just malfunctioning. They weren't turning on, they were shutting off automatically, they were having transmit issues. Something kind of catastrophic was happening to them, and we had no idea why. So of course, we're finding it, we're reporting it to our radio shop. The FDNY's radio shop is getting involved. They're doing their investigation. This made it all the way back to Motorola itself, actually. And when they took the radios apart, it was determined that the damage that was happening to them based on their investigation and the location of it, it was occurring because of the simple fact of when you're coming in for your shift, or you're doing change of shifts, you would take the radio out of the case, put it in the charger, or swap batteries, whatever, pull it out, stick it back in, secure it back in, and on those leather holsters, they had a strap with a snap right in the middle of it. Well, snapping that snap against the housing of the radio in the holster a minimum twice a day for over the course of however many years was actually causing issues to the circuit board, just by that little snapping trauma that was taking place to the radio. So Motorola actually addressed this, and if you look at some of the new radio strap holster designs, you'll notice that the snap is actually coming onto the side of the radio as opposed to being flat against the housing, and that was because of an issue that we unknowingly created. Okay, and also getting back to some of that downtime stuff, if you can, if you had the chance, just do a quick wipe down, or just a quick cleaning of your radio equipment, and try to keep some of the dirt and debris from getting into there. Because for this video, I was pretty much only addressing the radio, but understand I'm going to talk more about complete comm systems later. So there's a lot more components to these things than just the radio themselves sometimes. And anything we can do to try to keep the dirt, debris, sand from getting in there in the first place is going to work in our benefit in the long run. And this is why I feel so strongly, and I've quoted the Tech Prepper multiple times in the past with this whole tools, not toys line. If you're getting comms gear together get something that is IP67 rated. And now if you're stuck and for whatever reason you can't get an IP, rated piece of radio gear, but you still want to use whatever it is that you have, that's fine. But just at a minimum, try to tape over, some of your plugs and connectors if you're not using them to help protect things from getting in there. Another thing I just want to hit on real quick would be the battery itself. So yes, batteries can be very expensive. In today's modern tech, batteries have advanced a lot, and they are usually probably one of the most expensive components that's going along with any piece of electronic equipment we're getting nowadays. But if you're getting 2 to 3 years out of a battery, that's awesome. I mean, you really can't get mad about that. So things I like to address are, first, make sure you're purchasing your replacement batteries from a reputable dealer. I don't want anyone either frying the radio or having their freaking house catch on fire because of some cheap battery shit. Secondly, I like to write the date. I put it right on the battery. The date that I put that battery into service, I write that on the battery itself. So that way I know, one, if it's a faulty battery and I can address it with the company, but also two, and more commonly, at that 2 to 3 yearish mark, I can feel good about it that, if the battery has served its time, it's time to get a replacement. So these are just some of the things I catch myself doing on a somewhat regular basis to help maintain my gear. We invest a lot of money in our comms gear and in our gear in general. So why not put a little bit of time and effort in to help maintain it and last as long as it can and perform to its highest ability for as long as it can? If you do any additional type maintenance stuff to your gear, let me know in the comments. Or if you have noticed that doing any certain specific activities has damaged your gear, let us all know that as well. Maybe we can figure something out to help prevent it from happening. A lot of good stuff coming up. Make sure you check out the websites, medicineandmentalplaces.com or ranchstrategies.com. We have a lot of training courses come up. We just got a bunch of new hat color combinations in as well, so check out the store. And with that, as always, be safe.